I'm Lynn. Welcome to Cooking with Lynn. Welcome my son Nate. He's going to be baking for us today the rough puff pastry video that we were a little bit late doing, but that's okay. Better late than never. So we're going to tell you what you need, and then we're going to get started.
Hey everyone.
Take it away, Nate.
I'm Nate. The last time I was on the show, we did choux pastry, which was great. But this time we're doing something a little bit more simple, and it's probably a little bit more beginner friendly for home bakers. Rough puff pastry is kind of a loose puff pastry that you make instead of like a full puff pastry. Anyone who's tried to make a full puff pastry know that it is very labor intensive and time intensive. Rough puff pastry is a good alternative if you're looking to do something quick, but it uses the same ingredients, so it has a very similar flavor. It just doesn't have those definitive layers like a full puff pastry does. So the ingredients today we're going to use is an all-purpose flour, a kosher salt. You can use regular table salts. Just make sure your whatever I say today for salt, you're weighing, or if you're using tablespoons, you're using half of kosher salt, because kosher salt is double the size of a table salt. And we're going to be using regular old granulated sugar. The other ingredients we're going to use, we're going to pull out in a second, is butter. I recommend using a European style butter like Kerrygold or Plugra. I don't know if that's actually how it's pronounced, but that's what it looks like. And the reason you want to use a European style butter for any kind of puff pastry is that the higher fat content allows it to be a little bit more pliable, so that when you're rolling out you don't get any cracks. It's a little bit less important when you're doing rough puff pastry, because rough puff pastry, as the name implies, is a little rough. But we're going to get started by pulling some butter out of the freezer and getting started. So, Mom, if you would.
You're grating butter and I'm cutting butter.
Yeah,
So, do you want to explain why you do both?
Yep, so with most pastries, there's a little bit of butter in the dough, and then there's the butter that goes on for the layers. Since rough puff is a little different, what we're going to be doing is coating our flour in a little bit of, that's the wrong one, this one goes here, that one goes there. Okay, so the pads are basically going to create those discrete layers that you would see in a full puff pastry, and the grated butter is going to kind of act as the dough flavor enhancer. And also, when you add butter to a flour in a pastry, it kind of allows for the layers to stay separated without forming one solid, basically what would be like a pie dough. So
broke apart, is that okay?
that's fine. So we actually have an American style here, but that's all right. We're just gonna get started to grate, and you want to work quickly. The reason that I have these in the freezer is that you basically want all of your puff pastry ingredients to be as cold as possible.
Similar to pie dough.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you start to roll it out and it hits room temperature, it's all going to fold together and be kind of awful. One of the things that I would recommend if you're doing this with a cheese grater like I am is to make sure that your cheese grater is not getting gummed up on the inside, because it'll force all of your butter into one solid block again, and then you're going to have a hard time.
Defeats the purpose.
So you want to go quick, and we're going to basically get this grated and then get it cold again, and then we're going to talk about our dry ingredients, and then we're going to add it all together. If you want to put that on a plate and put it back in the freezer.
Okay. So basically it was half the butter got up and half the butter.
So we're using 170 grams of patted butter and 170 grams of grated butter, and I'm definitely going to lose a couple grams to the grater, but that's all right. This is not a super precise recipe. It's not a yeasted pastry. Like if you're making croissants or danishes or anything like that, you'll know that you typically will use yeast, and that adds to fermentation times. So if you're making a full puff pastry, it can take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours to get a final product, whereas puff pastry is about half that time. So I'm going to get this into a bowl.
So it seems a little fussy, but it's more about just follow directions and just not be so...
Yeah, it's a lot less technical, and the hardest part really is rolling it out and getting it to its desired width, because rough puff pastry will crack and it'll look kind of awful, but it's kind of supposed to. If you've ever watched like a home chef do it or a home baker do it, it also cracks. It's definitely something that a professional is going to do.
Is that going back in the freezer?
Yep. Just for a few minutes. The other thing we need is, can you We're also going to need a little bit of ice water because the way that we hydrate rough puff pastry is by using ice water. Now, each recipe for rough puff pastry is going to be a little bit different, and the technique is going to be a little bit different. The technique we're going to use here today is we're going to work the butter into the flour with our hands until the flour is coated. We're going to coat the pads of butter in the flour and keep them whole, and then use tablespoon by tablespoon just enough water to bring it together. And then once you put it in the fridge to rest, it's going to fully hydrate. It's going to look a little messy, but it's going to hydrate in the fridge. And then we'll work it out. We'll do one fold on camera, and then I actually have a swap that we're going to pull out, and we're going to be making cream horns, which is kind of a more technical thing to make. But the two easier ones are apple turnovers and what are we making? And twists. So it's going to be super easy. So it's probably strange to hear someone pull flour out of a freezer, but one of the reasons that you want to do this is because you want everything across the board to be as cold as possible. When your pastry gets too warm, the butter melts, the butter kind of seeps into the dough, and you'll just have one solid block of pastry. It'll taste really great, but not preferable. So in this bowl, I have 455 grams of all-purpose flour. I always use King Arthur. King Arthur's from New England. I'm from New England, so I use this flour. I'm also using Diamond Crystal kosher salt. It's the best salt to use, in my opinion, only because it's a very large crystal structure, which means that it dissolves very quickly, and you're never going to have any salt lumps. If you're using table salt, and I say 5 grams of salt, 5 grams of salt is 5 grams of salt, so you don't need to change anything. But if you ever see a recipe that uses kosher salt and it says a tablespoon, and you only have table salt, then you want to use half a tablespoon because kosher salt is twice the size. The other thing I'm using is it's going to be 5 grams of salt. Should have said that. And then 25 grams of sugar. And we're going to blend this basically.
So you've already put that in there, right?
Yep. Yeah. And you want to just put that in the freezer until it roughly cools down. I can feel the bowl is cold, which helps. Sometimes using like a metal bowl, something that holds temperature a little bit better, is preferable. All right, so we're gonna pull our grated stuff. So this is a good bowl to use. Metal bowl holds temperature very well.
Yeah, I've always wanted to get like a bigger metal bowl. One of these days I'm gonna do that.
So we're basically gonna take our grated butter and add it to our flour. And we're gonna make sure that it's all coated and stays independent. We don't want any lumps. And we're gonna work the flour and the butter together with our fingers very, very quickly. And working with your hands with pastry is kind of a double-edged sword. One, you can definitely tell the temperature of your ingredients better, and so you can kind of know if things are getting too warm. If you're kind of using a fork or a spatula or something to mix all of your ingredients, it can be kind of difficult to tell if you're at a bad temperature. But at the same time, when you're using your hands, you're warming up the ingredients a lot quicker. So I like to use my hands. I just like to make sure that I'm moving quickly.
This is not a dough you would ever do in a food processor, right?
You could. You totally could use a food processor, but when you add at this stage, yeah, you could definitely put on, I'd probably say the dough hook, and basically process it for a couple of minutes. I wouldn't use a whisk or the
No, not this, the food processor.
You could use a food processor, yes. Yes.
And then,
Sorry.
but we got this out.
You can use a food processor. That would work fine. I wouldn't use a food processor for the pads because the pads need to stay big.
You prefer this though because
you can
tell.
I can tell exactly. I can tell if there's dry spots. I can tell where the butter is. And this helps coat the flour in the milk fats, and it just helps us with those layers later down the line. So we have this. It feels good. It kind of resembles wet sand. You kind of have these like little bits you can see, but it's not a bad thing. If you're like dicing, say you don't have a cheese grater and you want to dice your butter and add it, you can do that, but you want to make sure that you're getting little lumps that aren't really much bigger than the size of a pea. So if you feel anything that's a little bit bigger than that, you can just work it through your fingers.
Seems pretty easy that way anyway.
Yeah.
Why dirty an appliance if you don't have to?
And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our pads and we're going to add them directly to the flour. Can you prepare me a glass of ice water?
How much?
I'm going to need about a cup. The amount of water you're going to use is going to vary widely. The recipe I'm using today comes from my favorite cookbook, Dessert Person. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. It's by Claire Saffitz. The technique she uses is basically get all of the flour and butter together, get them all coated, and then you're just using enough water to get it to come together. And it's going to look a little dry, but that's okay. And then a spoon, please. All right, so what you have here looks like, I don't know if you can see, it's a little washed out, but it just is.
That's the camera.
I know. I'm just trying to get under the light.
Yeah.
You're going to have this kind of like wet sand texture, and you're going to have these lumps of butter in them. So what we're going to do is one by one, and you can measure this. The recipe that I'm using says 113 grams of water. But when I was making the swap for this the other night, I used a lot more than 113 grams. And one of the reasons is it's wintertime. It's extremely dry out. All of my dry ingredients are probably as dry as they're going to get all year. So I can tell you that it's 113 grams to get it to hydrate. And you might get there and say, this is way too dry. Keep adding a little bit of water as you go. And as soon as it starts to come together and form one piece of dough, you're all set. And then you can plastic wrap
So you
it.
figure in the summer you would use less water, right?
Yeah, so when it's more humid out, you definitely want to use a little bit less, but
It's all just a matter of.
it's really just a matter of feel. And the water's going to evaporate during cooking. So I put 20 grams in it first. Oh, and I just launched some. And I'm just going to basically loosely start working the water in. And once I see that there's no more like clear wet spots, I'm going to add more water. And this is.
Seems odd to have such big wads of butter in there, but I guess
That is the
that's what
point.
we do, yeah.
So I'm going to go tablespoon by tablespoon. I'm up to about 40 grams.
Obviously, I've never made this.
And you're just going to keep working the water in. And we're going to add the water basically until we have some form of sticking. And that'll probably happen around the 100 gram to 120 gram range. And I'm using a spoon here so that I can keep everything kind of cold, since I don't need to work the butter anymore. I'm going to go two. I'm going to do one more. And just keep working the flour around. Some recipes say use a fork so that you're not getting things to lump together. But the reason you use ice water is because it just keeps everything cold. Everything stays cold as long as you can. If you notice things are starting to melt, then you can just pop your bowl into the fridge or the freezer and give it 10-15 minutes to firm back up. Because once your butter goes warm and starts leaking, it's kind of over. You can make a pie with it, but that's about it.
So it's definitely about patience.
Yes. But this is a good recipe for home bakers who don't want to be super precise, but they want to make something that's really good. So at around 60 grams, I'm starting to see a little bit of sticking, just a little bit. And I'm scraping my sides to make sure that whatever's sticking to the bowl is not staying there for too long. I'm going to
You
move
can
that.
definitely see it starting to come together a bit.
So we're at roughly 80 grams now. I'm going to go up to 100 and see what happens.
So how is it only weighing in the water?
I zeroed it out.
Don't do math.
It's not the calculators, the scale is doing math for us. All right, so it's still very dry. I don't really see a lot of cohesion. So I'm going to go all the way up to what the recipe recommends at 113 grams, which is a half a cup of water, if you're wondering. 113. And at some point I am going to get my hands in here because what the spoon is doing is it's helping hydrating the flour, but we do need some pressure to push everything together. But as you can see, it still looks like extremely dry, not very workable. But I'm going to get my hands in here and see if I can start pressing it together. And once I start to see most of it being able to stick and form what looks like a dough, I'll turn it out. But this still looks really dry, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Probably only add another like 10 grams. And I'm going to start working this with my hands because I want to start working it into a dough.
Looks like it's getting there.
Yep. Just going to slowly come together. Luckily, all of our butter pieces still feel really cold. I don't feel any warming yet, thanks to the ice water. The bowl is still a little bit cold. It's winter. It's dry. All right, so I am starting to see. So what we're gonna do? Can you give me a bench scraper? So our dough right now, if you want to call it that, looks pretty shaggy. So this is the literal definition of a shaggy ball of dough. So we're going to turn it out onto a surface. And I'm going to try to get all of my drier stuff that's been at the bottom on top. And I'm going to start to kind of force it together. And you can tell basically by the color of the flour that it's still very dry. So I'm just going to add tablespoon by tablespoon. It's not really a tablespoon because I'm using just a regular old spoon. A little bit of water, and I'm going to start working it. Now this part you have to work quick because you're starting to use your hands. Your hands are warm and the butter is cold temperatures. And we're going to basically work until we get something that's a dough. I think we're pretty much there almost, but we just need a little bit more. And I like to make sure that I'm putting the water on some of the drier spots so I'm not constantly hydrating the same areas. And we're just going to keep working it. Slowly but surely it will come to. So this is kind of the rough and the rough puff. It's a little bit shaggy looking.
Is that literally where the name comes from?
Yeah, so it's literally just a rough version of puff pastry. A little bit
Still
more.
doesn't want to be a dough.
Nope.
It's very dry in here.
It is very dry. I can feel it. But we're getting there. And I like to kind of like mix it up, make sure that the water is getting to the same areas. So one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that your dough is not getting too hydrated, because what's going to happen when we get it into the fridge, it's going to, see, that looks good. Still looks a little shaggy, but what's going to happen in the fridge is that via osmosis, the dough is going to be completely hydrated. It's going to kind of sit. The water that's being held by some areas is going to move out into the drier areas. So this is actually looking pretty good. It looks a little dry, but that's okay. What we're going to do is...
So the key is that it kind of came together.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to move around to see what the drier areas look like. And it actually does look really good. What we're going to do now is we're going to wrap it. Do you want to give me some plastic wrap? Yep. You don't want to overwork this because we're not trying to develop gluten. It's not just enough to cover it, basically. All right, we're going to do, just put it down. So it's not going to come all in one, but the plastic wrap is going to help us to shape it. And it looks a mess, to be honest, but it's going to. That's the point. But I can tell by the way that the flour feels that it does have some, all has some water in it.
You can see that it's got some.
But it's just not.
Definitely not any that's just flour, plain old flour.
But pastry in general needs always to be rested before it's folded or turned or anything like that. So I'm just going to use the plastic wrap to kind of form some edges. No, that's right. I don't need more. Just kidding.
Wants to break free.
Especially because the flour is going to make it not stick.
Yeah, this is not. I don't know. Did you bring this saran wrap?
It is your saran wrap. But
oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, God,
Alright, so it's loosely wrapped now. I'm just going to, with the saran wrap on, press it, make it into like a ball. And so it's definitely starting to warm up. I can tell that the butter's starting to get warm. And so this is going to go into the fridge for a while. You can probably do about an hour. And this is going to basically, it's going to hydrate. Everything's going to cool down. When you're ever making rough puff pastry or full puff pastries, it's really important that all of the ingredients are at the exact same temperature. And so when dough is wet and cold and butter is incorporated, they have a very, very similar texture. And when you're rolling stuff out, if the butter is harder than the flour or the dough, the butter will crack and the dough will spread, and you'll have really inconsistent layers. It's a little bit less important for rough puff pastry, but the principle stands.
So this is going to rest. When are you going to swap out? Should we?
So we're going to do a 10-minute rest, and then we're going to do a fold, and we're going to see how the hydration changes, and then we'll come back and we'll do this.
All right, so we're going to pause. See you in a few.
All right, so our rough puff has been in the fridge for like 15 minutes. I would recommend if you're doing this at home and you're not under a time constraint, you wait about an hour, but we're going to take it out of the fridge and start forming it into a block. I'm going to show you what to do. There's flour all over this place now.
That's all right.
Oh, gotta lose it.
Baking is messy.
All right, so we have our pastry. It's still very crumbly. That's okay. We're going to work it a little bit into a cohesive dough, and then we're going to put it back in the fridge to rest, and we're going to basically keep doing this. So it is significantly more hydrated feeling than it did before I put it into the fridge. And it's going to look crumbly, and it's going to look messy. That's okay. We're basically going to quickly move this into a block.
It looks more hydrated.
Yep. And I'm going to move this into a square. All right. And so one of the things you're going to want to look for in a rough puff pastry is these discrete lumps of butter. Where's my scraper? And so I'm not sure how much you can see on the camera.
Let's see if I can.
If we can get the camera a little bit closer.
Tell me when.
All right. Yeah, so you can kind of see, you can see like the color difference in the dough, whereas you have these lighter areas, which are like the discrete bits of butter. And we're going to take this and we're going to put it back as best we can into our fridge to keep cooling. And so what you're going to do after about an hour at this stage, you're going to roll it out as thin as you can, and you're going to do a letter fold. You're going to basically, where am I? I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here.
I might put the camera in the wrong place.
It's okay. You're going to flatten it to about a 1/4 inch, and you're going to do a letter fold, which is basically you take a third of the sheet and you fold it onto itself, take the other third and fold it on top, and you're going to have these 3 layers, and you're going to cover it in plastic wrap, and you're going to put it in the fridge. That's going to start forming the layers. After another hour, you're going to take it out and you're going to do the same thing. Roll it out, do a letter fold, put it back in the fridge, and let it come to basically fridge temp. If you have bits that fall off, just like kind of smash it in there. It doesn't make a difference. I have a swap we're going to use, but I'm going to work this pastry later, and then we're going to make something with it. But those folds are basically going to give you those layers that you would see in a full puff pastry, and it's not going to be consistent layers, so that when you bake it, you're not going to get those perfectly layered. You know, you see those posts on Instagram where like the layers are perfect and croissants or whatever. This is going to be a little bit rougher, hence the name, but you can see that after even just 10-15 minutes in the fridge, it's now a cohesive dough. And after a little bit more chilling and a little bit more hydrating, it's going to be completely able to be spread out, and that's going to be basically our flour, our dough. We get a little bit more plastic wrap. It does take a couple of hours to get this done, but it's a lot worth it. If you're doing a full puff pastry, especially a yeasted puff pastry, it takes a lot longer. So I'm just going to take my bench scraper and just get the plastic underneath it. Get the plastic underneath it. And then flip, and you can see it came together.
Yeah, it's definitely better.
Even though it was a crumbly mess when we put it in, it's pretty much all done. Yeah, we're gonna do 2 plastic wraps. I'm sorry to the environment for the plastic wrap that I'm using. It's worth it. All right, so this is basically gonna go in the fridge for a while. I'm gonna take out my swap. So once you've done your folds, you're going to get something that looks like this. And it looks a lot more like a smooth pastry dough. And we do want to move quick with this, but it's going to look a lot smoother. It's going to be fully hydrated, but even so, you can tell, I don't know how much you can tell on this. on
You can
this.
see how you folded it.
Yeah, it's very washed out, but it's okay. You can still see some dry flour on top, and that's okay. What we're going to do to make sure that we're not... You're going to want to have some flour on your bench. Very important. I'm going to show a technique on how to start spreading your flour or your dough so that you're making sure that everything's spreading out evenly and you're not getting like butter stuck or butter cracking. This is actually a technique from Julia Child. Is you're going to start smacking and beating as evenly as you can.
What does that do?
So this basically, because the butter and the dough is at the same temperature, it's going to smash everything outwards. If you try rolling it at this stage, there's a good chance that you're going to like create weird pockets and it's going to be hard. So this just makes it a lot easier, especially if you have a hard time like me forming perfect rectangles. And we're going to do this all the way around. Definitely the most entertaining part. And then we'll come to a point when you want to start rolling out. So you want to flour the top and give it a dusting. And you just want to start rolling out from the center. And it's going to be kind of tough to roll because it's cold, but that's all right.
Do you want to pause while you roll it?
No.
Okay. Use your muscles.
And if you start to see sticking, or if it starts coming up onto your roller, you just want to keep adding flour. If you're noticing that it's starting to melt, you just want to pop it back in the fridge for a few minutes. I don't think we're going to have an issue with that.
How thin are you trying to get it?
We're trying to get it to like, I want to say like a 1/4 inch, somewhere between a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch. I mean, it also depends what you're using this for. You could use this as a pie crust, a very flaky pie crust, and keep it kind of thick. But since we are making pastry, we want it to be pretty thin. I'm just going to beat it within an inch of its life. And you also want to make sure that you're occasionally picking your dough up. I like to flip. That'll kind of show me that if it's sticking, I can make sure that I'm doing whatever I can to stop it from sticking. The countertop's going to be at room temperature, so it's going to start warming the butter, and I can basically start telling that we're starting to see some warming based on how much it moves. But I always have a hard time getting my dough into a perfect rectangle, and that's okay, because we're not looking for anything perfect, because this is rough. But we're pretty much there. Alright, so we're at a good thickness. I can still see some discrete bits of butter that are spread out, so that's nice. What I'm going to do to make my life a little bit easier is I'm just going to cut off some edges and square it out. And if you do look, a lot of times when you're watching baking videos or stuff online when they're making puff pastry, is they'll cut a cross section and they'll try to see the layers of butter. It's a little bit more difficult with a rough puff pastry, but I do see a good definitive amount of like lines of dough and then butter. So we're basically where we want to be. And you can also take these scraps and like mash them together and make something else with them. I just want to be clean today and measure things properly. You can even take the scraps and make
Fix it up.
little holes. It's going to warm it up, but that's fine. And then square it out, square it out. All right, so now we have our sheet of dough. What we're going to do is we're going to make a couple of turnovers and we're going to make some cream horns. So I'm going to divide this in half. And then we're going to roughly measure these. We're going to do make one of these a twist. And then I'll make one here. It's going to be a little uneven, but if you're a perfectionist, you can definitely measure and make things more even. But
Yeah.
this is for demonstration
Yeah.
purposes only.
Yeah.
And we're going to make a couple of strips for our twists. And then we're going to make some thin lines for the cream horns. I want to make sure these ones are pretty even, or else they will not bake correctly. Alright, and then we'll make this one turn over. We can actually flatten these two a little bit. So while we work, I'm going to take the dough we're not going to use first, and I'm going to put them back in the fridge so that they stay cold. They can be loosely wrapped. It doesn't need to be perfect, just so the fridge doesn't get a mess. Loosely wrapped, put that in the fridge. Alright, so I have these thin strips.
Whoa. Cream cheese doesn't want to stay in
No,
there.
that cream cheese hates us. And so I have these thin strips. And you can actually lengthen them a little bit more. And so what we're going to make with these are called cream horns. Where are the cream horns?
I don't know.
One second.
We have them. They're still in the other room.
Maybe. Oh, they're right here. I got them. All right. So if you're a fancy baker and you make fancy pastry things, you might have something like this. You can make a bunch of different pastry stuff with these. We're going to make cream horns with these, so I do want these to be a little flatter.
Could somebody form a thing like this out of like foil? Would that work?
That would probably be really hard.
Yeah.
If you had some form of heat-resistant cone that you wrapped in foil, you could do that. But these are cheap. You can get these on Amazon for like somewhere between $5 and $10. So for a cream horn, you basically want to start at the tip and form a seal. And you're basically just going to wrap these with a little bit of overlap.
Oh, so they should be touching, right?
They should be touching, yes, because you fill a cream horn, as the name implies, and if you don't overlap them properly, they're going to leak. These are going to be little bite-sized cream horns because these are not very long. If you make the strips longer, they go farther down the thing, and you have a whole thing. But that's basically what it is. We're going to bake these on their sides. So just for the sake of making them look nice, I'm going to make them a little bit longer. Rolling them out, and that will make them good. And we're going to work through these one by one pretty quickly. Anytime you're working with a puff pastry or anything like that, you want to work as quick as you can. You can also do this. This makes your life a little bit easier. And make sure there's that overlap. That one's a little bit longer. It's nice. One by one. I'm going to do this method to save myself some time.
Seems just as efficient.
And cream horns, since like pastry is basically a very neutral flavor because it's just a flavor of butter, you can fill them with literally anything. When I made cream horns for my mom's birthday, I made apple pie cream horns, which was just apple pie filling with whipped cream on top, which is really good. You can make them savory if you wanted to. You could put a savory cheese filling with some herbs, or put some like prosciutto or something kind of meaty inside. But other than that, the reason pastry is so versatile is because it's kind of just the flavor of butter, and butter goes with everything. Butter is my favorite food, and forever will be. But this one came apart.
Yeah, let me fix it.
Okay, here we go. And I can definitely tell that the pastries are getting a little warm. So we're going to get these back into the fridge before we bake them, or else they will just leak butter and melt. That one's really long. It's getting all in one.
Let's go with it.
All right, and they all have a seal. if you want to put those in the fridge. So those are going to be filled after they're baked. So you're going to bake them hollow. If you make them. Next, what we're going to make is a turnover, which is probably one of the easiest things you can make with puff pastry or any kind of pastry. You're basically just going to want to roll out your rectangle of any size, really. Some people make triangles. That's fine. We're going to kind of cheese it today for a little bit. We're going to make rectangles. And so we have a basic store-bought apple pie filling. You can make your own apple pie filling. You can make applesauce. That's what I typically like to do. And we're basically just going to take a little bit of this and spread it on one side. And then I have an egg wash. Do you have a pastry brush? And so I have an egg wash here, one egg, whisked. And this is going to help us seal it. And we're going to basically just coat one side with the egg wash, the edges. You don't want to add too much egg because it's going to add moisture to it. And you're going to fold over and seal. Some people like to use a fork and create those nice traditional crimped edges. And you basically have a pocket. Kind of rough looking, but that's fine. And we're going to work that one by one.
Should I put it on the sheet?
Yeah, put it on the sheet and then they'll get refrigerated for a few minutes before they go in. Need a what?
Vent the top.
No. You could if you wanted to.
Just like to be fancy.
This one's kind of wonky. Oh well.
In the end, it doesn't matter.
Nope.
It tastes good.
We're gonna do. Where's the apple? There it is. A couple of apples in the center. Egg wash the edges. And turn over. Have it sit. Crimp.
Obviously, you can fill it with anything.
Yeah, you can
Cherry,
put anything. You could also make these a savory pocket if you wanted to make anything. And I guess if you want to be fancy, you can give it a little score at the top so that it vents. And we'll actually see what a vented versus an unvented one looks like. These are going to be huge.
It's okay.
Flour so it doesn't stick. Whenever you add flour to a pastry, you typically want to brush it off. You just want enough for it to not stick.
So I could do one too.
You could, yeah. Take this one and roll it out. You see me stretching? Oh, I broke it. You can stretch the dough a little bit. I'm going to do apples. Get a little juice in there. And then do the egg wash along the edges.
Do you need to egg wash the top too?
You can, yep. That'll give it a nice shine. Turn it over. Lick the juice off your fingers. This one's going to spill a little bit, but that's alright.
That's okay. It makes a crusty edge.
Everyone likes a little bit of caramelized sugar.
It's the best.
And a little bit of a score.
Trim that one.
Oh, yours look better than mine.
I don't think so.
Alright. The last thing we're going to make is probably going to be a little messy because I came up with the last second.
Just so flush.
Alright, so here I have a butter, cocoa powder, espresso powder. So if you're curious, espresso powder looks like that. It's really delicious. Cinnamon, sugar, and I melted some butter and then I constituted it in the fridge so that it's kind of like a paste. And so what we're going to do here is very simply, we're going to roll out just a little bit. Put.
Now you sort of invented this, or?
Yeah, I mean, so twists are typical and they're very common and not weird or anything, but they.
You invented that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a simple. The center of basically most twists is some sort of sugar butter mixture, and so I'm basically just putting a thin line down the center so that I have enough to see a line, and so we're basically just going to twist this all the way down.
Oh.
And twist in one way, twist until it forms a twist, and then just like that, it's going to go, how this is going to turn out, I don't know, onto the baking sheet. And we're just going to do that down the line. Probably only going to make a couple of these, because, but it's delicious. Tastes like coffee and chocolate and butter and everything that I love. So, it's probably strange to watch a baking video where someone kind of just does something improvisational on screen, but that's kind of the point of puff pastry, is you can use this for a lot of different things, and you can kind of get creative and decide what you want to make with it. Because if baking was an art, pastry is a canvas.
It is an art in a way. I mean, it's definitely creative.
Should I cut these edges? No.
Smells good.
It smells really good.
A little cup of coffee. That. Pretty darn yummy.
All right. We'll do this last one, and then we'll get the cream horns out, and we'll bake everything. And so I have my oven preheated to 365. Most recipes, depending on the thickness of your pastry, is going to be somewhere between 350 and 400. 400 being the top end, probably if you were adding something that had a lot of moisture, like a pie or a tart. But we have it through 365 because some of these things have a decent amount of moisture in the middle. We're not trying to cook the centers of our pastry, of our fillings, since they're all pretty much, they're not something that needs to be cooked all the way through to be safe.
Yeah, you would never put like raw chicken or anything weird like
No,
that.
you could. It would just take a lot longer to bake, and it would dictate the thickness of the pastry. Grab some of these.
Oh, we need room on there.
That's fine. Just put that one in the fridge or something, and then we'll bake all of the arcs. So we can take two of these off.
Bake them later.
Yeah.
Now, are they all going to bake for the same amount of time?
So probably not, because the turnovers are thicker and they're filled, so they're probably going to take a little bit longer. So what we're going to do is we're going to check them after about 20 minutes, and we're just basically going to be looking for like some golden brown textures, some golden brown browning on the top.
Do you want to put the rest of the cream ones on there?
Yes, please. And so the last step here
Wash.
is going to be egg wash. So we're going to bring the pan over. We're going to give pretty much all of these a nice coating of egg wash. Doesn't have to be perfect. So you can tell some of these are a little rough looking, but that's kind of the point of home baking. I like the look of things that look like they were made in a home and not in a factory and where everything's perfect. This one's going to look weird. I think the thing was supposed to be on the inside, but it's all right. We have some on the outside and some on the inside.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
A little bit of experimental baking. Give these a nice even coating all the way around.
So what are you thinking time-wise for each of these? You're gonna just, I mean, you say watch them obviously, but like, what's a good starting point to think about, like, taking.
You just want to keep an eye on them. I would check them after 10 minutes and see how they're doing. Actually, one last thing. I did get, everyone loves turnovers that have a little bit of sugar on them. So I do have some white sanding sugar here. I'm just going to give these a liberal dusting on top. And let's give
Why not?
some sugar to the twists too. All right. Improvisational baking.
All right, going in the oven. We're gonna come back in a little bit. Hello again. We're back.
All right, so we just pulled our pastries out of the oven. The turnovers took a little bit longer, but the cream horns and the twists were pretty much the same. I mean, you can see we have our turnovers here. They came out nice and golden brown. Very nice. Hard on top. The egg wash gave them a nice shine. And then we have the cream horns here. They have a little bit of color on the top, but they do flatten out on the bottom, and they're nice and golden brown, so you can tell they're crispy.
You can really see the lamination. I don't know if you can see that.
Let's see if I can, hold on, let me bring one up. Ready? I'm going to come around. So hopefully, if I'm in, so even though this is a rough puff pastry and we really didn't pay attention to how many layers we're creating, as long as you're doing those 2 letter folds and creating those basically 9 layers of the pastry, you're going to get all these nice separated layers of pastry. Doesn't look like the greatest braid, but the concept stands that a rough puff pastry will give you the nice flaky, buttery, crispy texture that you're looking for.
Good.
All right, so the last thing we're going to do is, because cream horns are just basically a pastry, it has no filling until it comes out. What I've done is, can you get me some scissors? I have filled, oh, we have some. I filled a pastry bag with some raspberry jam. Unfortunately, there's a small pastry bag, so it's going to be a little tough. I'm probably going to make a mess here. Oh, I sealed it. I nailed it. Okay, so this is probably going to come tumbling out, and we're going to make a big mess, but we're going to go like this. And these might leak a little bit because my rolling wasn't the best. What I like to do is basically fill it with jam just until you can see it. Maybe a little less because we're going to put whipped cream on top too. And fill. We're just going to fill these all around. You preferably want to wait until your pastry is at room temp before you do this, because if it's a little warm, whatever you're putting in it might melt, but that's all right. This is for demonstration purposes only.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't do it start to finish. The video would be 4 hours long.
Making a little bit of a mess. And like I said, these are probably going to leak a little bit, but that's all right. And then I made some, my mom made some whipped cream, which I did not pipe very well at all, but okay. Just want to get this to the bottom of your bag. I'm going to cut this first. This is going to get all over my hands, but that's all right.
There we go.
And so you can use a piping tip if you wanted to make these look really pretty, but I'm just going to give it a little bit of a swirl and top off the jam with the cream, which kind of keeps it in there. And then sometimes what I like to do with cream horns is put a little sanding sugar on top and give it a little bit of color or something. Makes it look pretty. Doesn't add much, but the texture is always good.
Beautiful.
Last one. And there we go. So we've made 5 or 6 cream horns, a couple of turnovers, a couple of coffee twists, all with the same recipe. So this kind of highlights the versatility of pastry in general, but you get the simplicity of, or the quickness with the rough puff pastry, and then you also get the delicious product you're looking for.
Oh my God. It's so buttery and good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
Really good.
Wow.
You could make Danish, right?
You could make Danish with these. Danishes are a little bit tricky because rough puff tends to rise a little unevenly, so you might not get that perfect square. But you totally could. You can make Danishes. You can really make anything that you can really think of.
It's really good.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty proud of myself.
Crispy and buttery.
Mm-hmm.
Looks good.
Cooked all the way through. Mm-hmm.
All right. That's rough puff pastry.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. I'm doing, what am I doing? Curry. Vegetable curry. So come on back and check it out. I'll put the recipe for this with the video. See you soon.